Right here, right now, this is Right Time Reborn, the internet's newest conservative political podcast. My name is Imra Becca. I am your host. We are here on a beautiful, sunny, slightly breezy, warm afternoon here on the Nature Coast of Florida, on the Gulf Coast. And we've got a lot of information to throw your way this week. So why don't we just dive right into it and get going, because otherwise we're not going to finish it all in an hour. Well, Turkey, one of our so-called allies in NATO, has decided that they are going to oppose the expansion of NATO into the Scandinavian countries of Sweden and Finland. And the question is why? Why on earth would Turkey want to have a conflict over the expansion of NATO in an area that is well over 1,000 miles away? Well, Turkey claims that it has to do with the fact that Sweden and Finland are taking the side of militants from the Kurdistan Workers' Party, what they call the PKK, which Turkey considers a terrorist group. Turkey wants these individuals extradited. Sweden and Finland don't want to extradite these people, but that's a small issue. That's really not enough of an issue to go head to head with the rest of NATO. So what is going on? Well, the reality is that this has to do with the Black Sea. Now, where Turkey is located, Turkey is basically a land bridge with a little break between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And that little break is called the Straits of Bosphorus. Almost the entirety of the Black Sea is controlled by Russia, with the exception of those parts in Turkey, a little bit of Romania, a little bit of Ukraine and so forth. But the vast majority of the Black Sea coastline is controlled by Russia. And anything that Russia wants to bring in or out of the Black Sea has to go through the Straits of Bosphorus, which is controlled by Turkey. So it would seem that there is a likelihood that there's some kind of backroom deal going on between Turkey and Russia, which is allowing the Russians to use Turkey to drive a wedge between the NATO partners. That's really the point here. Russia does not want NATO unified. They probably have made all kinds of deals with Turkey in the past and in the present over shipping going through the Straits of Bosphorus. And Turkey, which is ruled right now by Recep Erdogan, who's probably the most authoritarian leader Turkey has had since the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. They are now, they're not allies openly, but they both have strong military presences in Syria. They are both major players in the Middle Eastern theater of operations, and they seem to be, at least at times, working together. So it's not surprising that Turkey does not want the Scandinavian countries, which are right next to Russia, to join NATO, because Russia doesn't want that. We need to keep an eye on both these countries, on both Russia and Turkey, because Russia is as close to being an enemy as we can get without actually being in combat. And Turkey, while it pretends to be an ally, really has not proven itself to be an ally in the past. So, on to other parts of the international arena. The new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak, has issued a warning to illegal immigrants in the United Kingdom that they would be deported, and they, quote, will not be able to stay. The Conservative Party in England is not nearly as conservative as what we consider to be, quote unquote, conservative here in the United States. But they are far from where the Labour Party, which is an out-and-out socialist party, stands. And they have no patience for these illegals constantly coming into Britain. Now, think about this. Britain is an island. You can't just walk across the border like you can here in the United States. You can't swim across a little bit of a river. People who get into England, they're going by boat, they're going by plane. They're possibly taking trains or cars through the tunnel underneath the English Channel, sometimes referred to as a chunnel. But not a lot of people are able to get through there because there's only so much traffic that the tunnel can bear. So these people are actually flying in there, and they're just staying. Now, if England has a problem big enough to have to be addressed in this way with illegal immigrants, how do we imagine that in this country we're going to have no issues whatsoever with illegals, like the Democrats want us to believe, and we should just legalize them and let them stay and tra-la-la-la-la, have a wonderful sunny day here in the United States? It's ridiculous. You cannot have people entering countries illegally, contrary to the political and legal will of the people who live there, of their citizens, and just pretend that everything's okay. It's not okay. It's not all right for people of other nations, for foreign citizens, to decide that they just want to move somewhere and they should be allowed to move there. That's nonsense. It's absolutely ridiculous. Going halfway around the world, China has announced that they are increasing their defense spending by 7.2%, and they're setting a target for economic growth of around 5% for 2023. Now that means that they think that they're going to get around 5%, but they're increasing their military spending by more than their economic growth. They are getting ready for something, whether it's an invasion of Taiwan, whether it's something to do with Russia, whether they're going to face off against the United States, whether it's something entirely different. But for a single year's defense budget to increase by 7.2% in one shot, when you've got an economic growth they're hoping for an economic growth of 5%, that tells us there's something going on. And we here in the United States, we have to start paying better attention to what's going on in China. But we also need to pay attention to here in the United States. Steven Spielberg, the movie producer, has issued, and I know he's not a conservative. He's not a guy that we agree with politically if we're conservatives. But he is somebody who pays special attention to the problem of anti-Semitism. This is the guy who produced Schindler's List. He has been strong in his support of the Jewish people. And he's saying that he has not witnessed anti-Semitism as overt as we're seeing it today ever in the United States during his lifetime. He says anti-Semitism has always been there. It's either been just around the corner and slightly out of sight, but always lurking, or it has been much more overt, like in the 1930s. Not since Germany in the 30s have I witnessed anti-Semitism no longer lurking, but standing proud with hands on hips, like Hitler and Mussolini, kind of daring us to defy it. I've never experienced this in my entire life, especially in this country. If Mr. Spielberg is correct, we in the United States have an obligation to do whatever we can to stop it. This is not simply freedom of speech. This is not simply the fact that somebody has an opinion. Anti-Semitism is virulent. It is hateful. It always leads to violence. And that's where the problem is. You can be a hateful piece of garbage, but you have a right to your opinion. But when that opinion leads to violence, then we have an obligation as a society to put a stop to it. Anti-Semitism is trash. It is a despicable, disgusting idea, and we cannot tolerate that here in this country. We simply cannot. So if Mr. Spielberg is correct, we need to address this in a way that is appropriate and ethical and moral per the traditions of this country, the traditions of equality, the traditions of freedom, the traditions of respect for human rights. We need to make sure that these people cannot violate the rights of our Jewish brothers and sisters. On the day that violence begins against Jews in America, we must all be Jewish. We must all stand shoulder to shoulder with those folks. But more importantly, we need to act now so that we never get to the point of violence. If somebody is spewing this poison, that person needs to be shunned. That person needs to be... We don't do business with companies that will hire people like that. We don't do business with companies that are owned by people like that. We don't elect people like that to public office. We don't elect them to the leadership of our Lions clubs and Elks clubs and Rotaries and whatnot. We do not do anything to raise the profiles of these people to somehow justify what they are doing. We cannot allow this to take root in America at this point in time. To even have to have this conversation almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. I don't understand how we even have gotten to this point in this country. Here we are 22 years after 9/11, when the entire country was united against the people who brought down those two towers because of our friendship with Israel, because of the fact that we stood firm and strong with the Jewish people. 22 years later, we've got this level of anti-Semitism. We have people painting swastikas on Jewish headstones in cemeteries. We have windows being broken in synagogues. We have Jewish people in places like New York City being attacked just because they happen to wear clothing that is identifiably Jewish. In the 21st century in the United States? No way. No way do we allow that to stand. We cannot, we must not allow that to stand. Well, former Congressman Lee Zeldin, who ran for governor in New York State and came fairly close to winning. It was a much tighter race than anybody would have imagined. He is saying that the Republican Party in America, quote, did not earn a red wave nationally during the November midterms. And that's why we had issues and just barely won the majority in the House and actually lost the seat in the Senate. In midterm elections like this, we should not have had such difficulty. And according to Mr. Zeldin, he says, when your high-paid political consultant tells you not to go to a heavily Democrat area, well, that's exactly where we need to show up and earn the support of those Democrats. We cannot relinquish the cities. We cannot relinquish the suburbs. We cannot relinquish anything to the Democrats. If we're on offense confidently, that will be the path for us to earn a red wave, because in 2022, we did not earn a red wave nationally. In 24, we must to save America. He's right. We can't just fight our battles based on calculation. Oh, we're going to fight in Georgia and we're going to fight in Arizona, but we're not going to fight in Illinois and New York. No, we have to fight everywhere. If nothing else, by fighting in places where the Democrats are confident of winning, we force them to reallocate their resources, their funding, and move them away from places where they might actually win. This has to be a strategic decision. We have to decide that we are going to fight everywhere. We can't just surrender New York and California, even though we know the chances are we're not going to get very far there. But we can't surrender it. They are part of this country. And frankly, there are millions of conservatives living in New York, in California, in Massachusetts, in Illinois, in Oregon, in all the blue states. People who think like you and me live in those states. We can't relinquish those states. We can't surrender those states. We have to fight for them. And in fighting for them, we make our victories in the places where it's easier for us to win all the more possible, all the more overwhelming. Because when the Democrats have to reallocate their resources, they can't fight hard in the places where they might be able to make headway. So we need to look at this in a very strategic manner, in a very well thought out way of approaching these issues. Okay, it's vital. It's vital that we do that. Moving on to some presidential politics. The mini civil war between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis is continuing, and it's really very one-sided because DeSantis is saying absolutely nothing against Trump. He hasn't said a single bad word about Trump at all. But Trump, he's playing his typical childish game. He's calling names. He's calling him Ron DeSanctimonious and Meatball Ron. Meatball Ron? What kind of an anti-Italian slur is that? And the latest one is Tiny D. He's calling him Tiny D. I'm not going to even try to guess what Donald Trump means by Tiny D, but it's probably something pretty disreputable. And DeSantis' book came out last week, and Trump attacked him over that, saying that, well, Ron DeSantis locked down his state. Ron DeSantis locked down the state of Florida for just a few weeks, just long enough for us to figure out whether or not COVID was anything truly dangerous. It's for a very, very short time. Just a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, if I recall. It wasn't a long-term lockdown. But somehow Trump is making it out like Ron DeSantis did something horrible by locking it down for just a few weeks. While at the same time, Donald Trump signed bills to spend $10 trillion in a period of about a year and a half to address COVID. And nothing is left to show for it from that money. Nothing. If we had not had shutdowns, if we had not had lockdowns, there would have been no reason to extend PPP money to the to businesses who were being forced to close their doors. There would have been there was no reason for us to lock down the country more than a couple of weeks until we figure things out. Donald Trump allowed the states to do that. He made it easy for the states to do that because he signed these bills that just sent out free checks to everybody and sent hundreds of thousands of dollars to small businesses, hundreds of thousands of dollars each on the average. It's hypocritical for him to attack Ron DeSantis over the COVID issue. I mean, it's just crazy. In the meantime, New York prosecutors have invited Donald Trump to testify into their investigation before a grand jury into the investigation of the Stormy Daniels matter. For those of you who don't remember, Stormy Daniels was a porn star who reportedly had an affair with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, for a long time, denied having that affair. But just a little while ago, he made a post on Truth Social in which he said it was a long time ago, which sounds like he's admitting it, but we don't know whether it was actually an admission or whether it was just a typical Trump slip of the lip. But it certainly sounds like an admission. And at one point, he had his lawyer, Michael Cohen, give Stormy Daniels $130,000 to keep her quiet. Now, the problem with that is not that he gave her money. Everybody is allowed to give anybody whatever money they want, as long as taxes are paid on it. It is what it is. The problem was that at the time that this happened, Donald Trump was running for president. And Michael Cohen paid that money out of his own pocket, and Trump didn't pay him back until the whole thing blew up. So it looked like a campaign finance issue. Whether or not the state of New York will be able to prove that it was a campaign finance issue is another story. I honestly don't know whether they'll be able to prove it. But it looks like it from a certain point of view. And what's more important is the fact that, as prosecutors like to say, or as lawyers like to say, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. Basically, if a prosecutor has decided to open a grand jury investigation and he wants an indictment, he is going to get the indictment. That's because the bar for securing an indictment is very, very low. All a prosecutor has to show is that he has the minimal amount of evidence necessary to show that that there is probable cause that a crime has been committed and that the person being indicted committed that crime. It's very, very minimal. Prosecutors can basically indict anybody. Now, what makes it even easier for a prosecutor is the fact that a grand jury proceeding is a very one-sided affair. Defense attorneys are not in the room. There is no judge. The defense is not allowed to present any evidence. They cannot cross-examine the witnesses. And in fact, there is no decision being made during the proceedings of the grand jury as to whether the information being presented to the grand jury is admissible evidence. Prosecutors can present anything, including hearsay. They can present all kinds of things that they're not actually allowed to present in court. Where a trial is weighted in favor of the defense, heavily weighted in favor of the defense, because the case has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, unanimously to 12 people in a jury. A grand jury proceeding is weighted heavily in favor of the prosecution. And therefore, if a prosecutor in New York wants to indict Donald Trump over the Stormy Daniels affair, he's going to get that indictment. There's no question. They're not going to ask for an indictment if they think that they can't get it. If they think that they are, so we're never going to see a report that says the indictment was requested by the prosecution and the grand jury voted not to give it to him. We're not going to see that in the Donald Trump case. They're going to be extremely careful, and they're only going to ask for it if they are certain that they're going to get it. And because the burden is so low on the prosecution, it's nearly impossible for Trump not to be indicted if that prosecutor wants him indicted. The next step is far less certain. Will they be able to secure a conviction? That's a much higher hill to climb. And it's going to be difficult because they have to prove not only the facts, but also intent. They have to show that what Trump was trying to do had something to do with his campaign. It's highly unlikely that there won't be an indictment, but the conviction is much less certain. It's going to be an interesting time, I'll tell you that right now. And a lot of people are going to be very angry. A lot of people who support Donald Trump are going to be incensed that he is even indicted. But that's how things work. Prosecutors get their indictments. While all this is happening, it looks like the powers that be within the Republican Party, according to Politico, says Republicans can't wait for Trump to implode. It looks like he's losing steam. It looks like he's losing power. And if you're looking at all the polls, Ron DeSantis is either neck and neck with Trump in certain places, or he's way ahead of Trump. There are a few outliers here and there that show Trump ahead. But overall, the vast majority of polls show DeSantis not just 1 or 2 points ahead, but strongly ahead of Trump. So we'll have this is going to be a very interesting campaign season once DeSantis jumps in. There is a report coming out from anonymous sources within Florida politics who say that Ron DeSantis has made his decision. They're saying he has decided that he is going to run. He's telling some of his close advisors, some of the people that he's close with politically. And frankly, if this is coming out publicly, if people are quote unquote leaking it, the chances are very, very high that it's not a leak in the traditional sense, that Ron DeSantis has allowed it to be spoken of, that he's given his thumbs up for people to have these conversations, to go to the press, to tell them that this is happening. He is not officially in the race yet. That is unlikely to happen until somewhere around the second or third week of May, a week or so after the Florida state legislative session closes. At that point, DeSantis will more than likely jump into the race, full steam ahead. And given the buzz that has been building around him since this past November, and even before that, he is likely to get a really good bounce in the polls. I'd say somewhere from 10 to 12 points. That usually happens when somebody jumps into the race. We didn't see it happening with Nikki Haley. But Nikki Haley is somebody that people are looking at and going, yeah, she's nice, she's smart, she's experienced, but she's unlikely to win. And it's not because she's a woman. It's just because she just doesn't have that recent inertia, that recent momentum. The fact of the matter is that of the people who could possibly run, who are being talked about running, very few of them are actually currently in office. Trump is no longer president. Nikki Haley is no longer governor. She's no longer the UN ambassador. All the various other people that are spoken of are either out of office or have never been in office, like Vivek Ramaswamy. Of the people that are considered likely contenders for the nomination, there are only two who are currently in office: Tim Scott and Ron DeSantis. There may be some others farther down the list, but they're not people who have any likelihood of getting anywhere. Now, what does that mean? Clearly, Ron DeSantis is using his position as governor to build his own national reputation. He is pushing some of the most conservative bills through the Florida state legislature that we have seen anywhere in the United States in 50 years or more. And bills which have already been passed are being updated. There is a bill that we all know, the Democrats love to call it the Don't Say Gay bill. It really has nothing to do with whether or not one can say gay. It has to do with whether or not a teacher can speak about sexuality to a young child in school. The original bill, the original law, as it is on the books right now, says that a teacher cannot speak to a child under grade 3 at all about sexuality, and after that only in an age-appropriate manner. Well, the state legislature here in Florida is now looking to expand that to 8th grade or below instead of 3rd grade or below. That's 5 more years. It still doesn't prohibit anybody from saying the word gay. It just says parents are the ones who make the decision as to how and when their children are going to learn about sexuality issues. That it is not up to a teacher who really doesn't know that student, who has no say in that student's life. Teachers are not the experts on this matter. Parents are. And the law in the state of Florida recognizes that. Well, pushing that law through is one of the things that has made Ron DeSantis pretty popular. Expanding it is going to make him more popular. When you add to that all the various other things, making Florida the 26th constitutional carry state, passing a law that will require all employers to use E-Verify to make sure that their employees are actually qualified to work, legally qualified to work in the United States. There's several other bills that are going through right now. All these things are going to make Florida very, very or make Ron DeSantis very, very popular among conservatives who are looking to see who they should support for president in the upcoming election. And what we're seeing also is that some of the big name Republican and conservative donors and politicians, especially people who have supported Donald Trump in the past, are now jumping in to support Ron DeSantis, even though he has not yet chosen to announce himself as a candidate. There are major political PACs with a lot of money behind them, which have been formed to draft Ron DeSantis. A lot of these are being run by former Trump people like Ken Cuccinelli, who just a couple of days ago announced his new super PAC to try to draft DeSantis. At the same time, the big names in American politics are more and more lining up behind DeSantis. They can't even endorse him because he's not officially a candidate, but they've made it very clear that he is the guy that they want to support. This is unprecedented in American politics today. Politico recently just a few days ago, did a poll or a survey, not really a poll, of 3,000 county chairmen within the Republican Party. They didn't obviously get all 3,000 to return their survey form, but they got enough that they have a pool of people that they can try to use to see where the party stands on the Trump-DeSantis issue. 73% of the people who returned their surveys of these Republican county chairs said that they would consider Ron DeSantis as a strong candidate for president. Only 43% said the same thing about Donald Trump, and 36% said the same thing about Nikki Haley. Trump is only 7 points ahead of Nikki Haley, and he's 30 points behind Ron DeSantis. Among active politicos who work boots on the ground in local politics and have a real understanding of how their people are going to vote. That is significant. That is truly significant. Now, another opinion piece was written by an op-ed writer who served in the administrations of 3 Republican presidents. His name is Justin Safey. He's a partner at the lobbying firm of Ballard Partners, and he publishes SafeyReview.com, which is a website about Florida politics. And in his piece, he speaks of the 4 steps, that Ron DeSantis has to follow and has followed in order to be successful in running for president. The first one is to take decisive action. According to the author, this step is counterintuitive because it's based on the idea that it is, quote, more important for a leader to be decisive than for the decision itself to be popular. Well, let me repeat that. It's more important for a leader to be decisive than for the decision itself to be popular. Safey goes on to say that voters do not want weather vanes for leaders. They appreciate a leader who takes bold action and gets things done much more than someone who constantly puts a finger in the wind, unsure of which direction to move next. In other words, voters want somebody who knows what he believes and is willing to act on it, even if the voter happens to disagree on some portion of the ideas of that politician. They want somebody who is a leader, not somebody who is a follower. We have a big problem with that in the Republican Party right now because in a lot of places, especially in the so-called blue states, the Republican leadership wants us to move towards the middle. They want us to move towards the left. They want us to gauge what people want done and to try to follow that instead of taking decisive leading action. And that is why we lose elections in blue states like New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts. I know this from my time having lived in upstate New York. I was constantly frustrated by the inability of Republican leaders to understand one simple thing. You will never get liberals to vote for Republicans. Stop trying. It's stupid. It's ignorant. It shows a lack of understanding of the way the voters think. The only way to win elections for conservatives, for Republicans, is to be as conservative as possible and to use that conservatism to build voter turnout among conservative voters, among Republican voters, among independents who lean Republican. As long as those people are staying home because they don't believe in the candidates being run by the Republican Party, elections will be lost in those places. Well, we don't have that problem here in Florida because we have a governor who is strong and he is decisive and he will not buckle under the pressure. We have somebody who's done something that we haven't seen in America since Ronald Reagan. Somebody who's been able to attract the vote of middle-of-the-road voters without compromising his conservative principles. Reagan did that, and now DeSantis is doing it, and we haven't seen it since Reagan's time in office. Not in any major political figure. Step 2, according to this piece, when possible, take your most decisive action on issues that unite Republicans, divide Democrats, and appeal to independents. Well, again, that's something that Ron DeSantis does. He pushes the most conservative possible legislation right through our legislature. He uses that to divide Democrats. And then he goes to the independents and says, this is what you need. This is what is going to do you good. This is what's going to benefit you. And because he's not fake, because they see that this is his real belief system, his real set of principles, they believe him and they vote for him. Number 3, step 3, hope to be condemned by major news media outlets or scorned by elites in Hollywood or university faculty lounges. Ding, ding, ding. That's what DeSantis is doing. He does things that get CNN and NBC and college professors at Berkeley and college professors here in Florida, for that matter, and newspaper reporters and editors in Miami and Orlando and all sorts of other places to condemn him, to talk about how dangerous he is. Because despite working in journalism, these people have obviously never heard the saying that there's no such thing as bad publicity. Ron DeSantis is getting good, strong publicity that helps him with his voter base and helps get voters in the middle of the road, the independent voters, helps get them out to vote for him. And step 4, stand your ground. Like the Tom Petty song says, I won't back down. You can stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down. That should be Ron DeSantis's theme song whenever he goes into any event to speak. I won't back down. That's how he's doing things. Much more so than anybody else we've seen since Ronald Reagan. And yeah, I'm comparing him to Reagan. He's not Reagan. Ronald Reagan was somebody that we see once in a century, if that. But DeSantis is pretty good. He's following the Reagan playbook. And he's doing it well because he believes in it. So, okay. Today's Ron is not like 1980s Ron. But he's pretty good today. And he's giving us something that we haven't had in a while. Hope that we can really kick the Democrats in the next presidential election. That we can take the White House and thereby appoint the next 3 or 4 Supreme Court justices. That he might be able to keep the White House for 2 terms. And appoint some conservatives to liberal seats on the courts, whether the Supreme Court or the federal court. system. That's Ron DeSantis. And he's going to be a tremendous president, an absolutely tremendous president. But to get there, he still needs to win the nomination. And according to Politico, the Republican presidential nomination could depend on how California ends up voting. You know, it's very, very interesting what's going on in California. We don't think of California and New York as places that are necessary for us to win in order to get a president into the White House. And in the general election, they're not. But in the primaries, it's very important to get those votes because they both have large numbers of electoral votes. California is the largest population in the country. Texas is number 2. Florida is number 3. New York is number 4. These 4 states have so much population, 37 million in California alone, that you have to win those states in order to win the nomination. So Ron DeSantis just recently went to California. He went to give a speech at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. Yes, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library is in California. Why? Because Ronald Reagan lived in California. He died in California. He was the governor of California. So that's where they built his presidential library. So California Governor Gavin Newsom released a statement aimed at DeSantis, and he said, "You're going to get smoked by Trump." If you're a conservative running for the presidential nomination, for the Republican presidential nomination, the last thing you want is for Gavin Newsom to say something positive about you. When Gavin Newsom says you're going to get smoked by Trump, that tells us there's something wrong. And DeSantis is going to take advantage of that. It's going to be amazing. Because you're going to have commercials being produced with Gavin Newsom making that statement, supporting Trump. Is that what we want? Do we want a Republican nominee that Gavin Newsom basically endorsed? Because that's what happened. And it's not going to happen. DeSantis is not going to get quote unquote smoked by Trump. All the people that are behind him, all the big politicos, all the money people, all the grassroots support he has. It's been a long time since we've had major political figures, major donors, and grassroots Republican voters all coalescing behind the same person. And for that person to be as strongly conservative in his values as Ron DeSantis, this is a 1 in a million opportunity for us. We have the ability to elect a president who is going to kick the Democrats like there's no tomorrow. And the fact that Gavin Newsom has endorsed Donald Trump is just going to help Ron DeSantis. It's just going to help him. Well, the economy is in a weird situation right now. It says that on the one hand, we're seeing inflation. We're seeing interest rates go up. In some places, we're seeing issues with unemployment. But we're also seeing the economy strong in other parts of the country. We're seeing Florida's economy grow like gangbusters. We're seeing Texas's economy grow. And interestingly enough, a recent study shows that the 9 states with the lowest average unemployment rates for 2022, every single one of them had a Republican governor. Every one of them. The 10 states with the highest annual average unemployment rates all had Democrat governors. This shows you exactly what's going on. Now, let's read this off here. We're talking about the states with the lowest numbers. I'm just going to read the first few of them. South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Utah, Missouri. Those are your top 5. Their unemployment rates were 2.5% or lower. If we look at the top 11 states were all Republicans, you got 2 Democrats in there for 12 and 13, and 14 is Florida. The difference between South Dakota and Florida is 2.1% to 2.9%, still under 3%. Okay, the states with the highest unemployment rates: New York, 4.3%, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Illinois, and Nevada with 5.4%. Nevada's unemployment rate is almost twice Florida's. It's close to 3 times, 2.5 times that of South Dakota. The Democrats are mismanaging our economy to a level that we've never seen before. Yeah, we've seen Jimmy Carter. We've seen the economic issues under Obama. But what we're seeing right now is a clear demarcation between Republican-run states and Democrat-run states and where they stand when it comes to unemployment. And unemployment is a very important economic indicator because it's not just about who's working and who's not working. It's about the ability of those states to attract businesses. Businesses these days in America are moving from one state to another based on how the economy is run in that state. They are voting with their feet. So when businesses go from California or New York or Oregon to Texas, to Florida, to South Dakota, to Louisiana, to all these places around the country, that's a sign of something. That's a sign that the economy is good in Republican-run states and bad in Democrat-run states. More importantly, if we look at the big states in the country, like Texas and Florida, they have low unemployment, run by Republicans. The big states that are run by Democrats, like California, like New York, like Pennsylvania, they have high unemployment. It's easy for a Democrat governor in a small population state to keep the unemployment low. It doesn't take much because your population is relatively low. But in big states, that's where you see real swings. And when big states like Pennsylvania and California and New York have high unemployment, while Florida and Texas have low unemployment, there's an issue there. And we see who it is that's successful. Biden has not learned this lesson. He has not learned this lesson at all. He now wants a tax increase of $5 trillion. Now that comes out to the largest tax increase in modern history. The largest tax increase in America's recent history, $5 trillion in one big chunk. And he says that he wants it to, in order to create $3 trillion in deficit reduction over the next decade. That means $300 billion a year. Out of our $6 trillion economy, he wants to reduce the deficit by $300 billion a year, 5% of the total budget, and he wants to do it by taxing the very people who create jobs, America's wealthy. Instead, of cutting spending. We should be cutting spending like crazy. Like crazy. Not just because it's economically in our best interest to do that, but because the Constitution demands it. We have three major things in the major portions of the Constitution which speak to this issue. The first is the Enumerated Powers Clause in Article 1 of the Constitution. And that gives us a list of the types of activities in which the federal government may engage. There's other places in the Constitution where we add things to it with amendments and so forth. But for the most part, that list is what the government is allowed to do. Then we have the 10th Amendment, which tells us that the federal government may not do things which are not actually given to the federal government in the text of the Constitution. Well, we're doing those things all the time. So we need to cut back on all the things that we're not allowed to do under the Constitution. We need to get rid of those activities and cut our federal spending commensurately. And then there's the third thing, where our federal Constitution tells us that the federal government is required to pay all of its debts. So we've taken trillions of dollars out of Social Security. The federal government is required to pay that debt. We have taken out loans from foreign governments and from our own citizens. We're required to pay those debts. If the government shuts down because we don't pass a budget or because we don't raise the debt ceiling, we are still required to pay our debts. That means we take money from other sources, things that are still actually in motion. It means we cut things like social spending because we have to, because we have no choice, because the Constitution requires it. We don't just start raising taxes like lunatics because we don't want to cut spending. We don't stamp our feet like a 3-year-old in the candy shop screaming to his mommy, "I want it." Well, it doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter how much you want to spend. You're not allowed to do it. So the Democrats need to be taught a lesson. And Joe Biden needs to have his demand for a $5 trillion tax increase rejected. Quite frankly, no Republican should ever vote for a tax increase, period. Doesn't matter why. There's plenty of money in any government budget, whether it's the federal, the state, local, county, school district, whatever. There is plenty of money to pay for the necessities if we get rid of the things that are not necessities. And quite frankly, most of the federal budget is not made up of necessities. We need to get our spending under control. We need to get our economy under control. We need to behave in a way that we would behave in our own homes. You don't take out a credit card to pay off another credit card and then you increase your debt because you've got more interest coming onto it. What you do is you stop spending on anything that's not necessary and you pay down your credit cards. You don't take out a credit card to pay your mortgage. You don't acquire more debt in order to pay off old debt. And our politicians need to learn this. There is no excuse for this kind of behavior, this kind of irresponsible fiscal behavior. Speaking of irresponsible, we've got issues at our border. We have issues at our border. And Arizona Sheriff Mark Lamb said, "Stop saying the border is secure because the border is not secure." He was speaking before the U.S. House Committee on Homeland Security. He was joined by a private investigator whose teenage sons were killed by ingesting fake Percocet pills that contained fentanyl. They did not know what they were taking. We are under a terrorist attack in this country. And the terrorists that right now are not blowing up buildings. They're bringing in cheap drugs to kill our kids. In the past, drug dealers wanted to make sure that their customers would stay alive so that they could keep buying stuff. When you've got drug dealers now selling fentanyl, which kills people with the tiniest little amount, those are not people who are trying to keep their market alive. Those are people who are trying to kill. Fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. It isn't simply a narcotic. It isn't simply an illegal drug. It isn't simply an illicit substance. It is a weapon of mass destruction. This is a terrorist attack. We need to shut down our borders. We need to make sure that all these fake drug pills containing homemade fentanyl are locked out of our country. We need to find any facility that's creating fentanyl here in the country, any facility that's creating methamphetamines. We need to take the war on drugs seriously. We got to stop legalizing these things left and right like we've done the last 10 years. Absolutely ridiculous that we're legalizing drugs. And we need to accept the fact that these are weapons. They're not recreational substances. They are weapons being used against our children. They're weapons. Weapons of mass destruction. They're as bad as any chemical agent that could be blown up in the New York subway system or put into the water supply somewhere. There's no difference between bringing fentanyl into the United States and bringing a nuclear weapon into one of our harbors. People are being killed in large numbers, and that is growing. And we have to stop it. We must stop it. Speaking of things that are weaponized, Congress just today voted 419-0 in the House to declassify any information that the U.S. government has on the origins of COVID. Well, some of us have said from the beginning that COVID there's no good reason for it to have existed and to have gone become as widespread as it has in as short amount of time as it did. And we as a people have a right to know what the federal government knows about it. The bill is so strongly supported by both parties that it would be impossible for Biden to veto it. If he does, the veto will be overridden. We are going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to find out just what the Chinese government did in order to screw us over. Now, COVID is not a tremendously dangerous illness. But we don't know what it was that the Chinese were trying to accomplish. Were they just trying to see how things spread so they could use a later, more targeted virus? Were they trying to weaken our economy? What was it that they were trying to do? They were trying to do something, because it's pretty clear that this thing was created in a lab and somehow set loose upon the entire world. And if that's true, the Chinese government owes us a whole heck of a lot of money, at the very least. At the very least. Ladies and gentlemen, this country is at war. We have been at war for a long time. We are number one in the world. We're the number one economic and military power. We're always going to be targets of other countries. We are always going to be at war. Our state of being is non-stop war. Whether we're shooting today or not, we are at war. And we have to start treating the world as if most of it is a potential enemy. China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela. Terrorist groups, drug cartels, North Korea. We've got enemies all over the place. And we need to act in a way that will defend our kids. Well, we've gone through another hour. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Bye now.